one could define themselves as many things, but I guess I think I'm just trying to find my own purpose in life as somebody who wants to build a community around himself. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that about twice before, and I figure, hey, you know what? You screwed up a bunch of times before this. You can try again. So I'm thinking. I used to be a biomedical researcher. I used to work in labs. I used to do molecular and cellular biological work. And then, well, that didn't turn out so great because I couldn't get employment after I finished my master's research. So I decided, okay, let's switch gears, and I went into pharmaceutical business development and marketing. But I don't think it's my employment that defines me. I think it's the one thing that's remained constant since I learned about who I am as a person at the age of 18, and no, not earlier than that, which was just an entertainer who always liked to build a community around himself. So I guess that would be the simplest way to answer the question. Or as my boss would say, you had to write a master's thesis on even that, didn't you? So.
So how did you start? Like, how did your journey start? Well, I know you a big blues person. I saw you play the harmonica and stuff, but and you seem like you're a very theatrical person and creative person. What was that like? Like, how was your childhood living in India? Like, take us to that journey.
You know, people have a tendency to romanticize their past growing up, and I say in no uncertain terms, my childhood was boring as hell. In fact, I'd always known that I was quite a bit of an extrovert, but I didn't know how much because I was always considered off the beaten track or weird back here home in India, what used to be called home for me. And I was born and raised in Mumbai in 1994, and I always felt out of place. And while growing up, by the way, I'm an only child. While growing up, I always felt isolated in many ways, and I didn't really have a bunch of many friends who could truly understand me. So I guess I just dove right into television and to movies and to books, and I just kind of kept myself involved in all of those things. And I felt rather pigeonholed as a child because just like I hate to play into the stereotype, every generic Indian boy, I went to Catholic school, even though I was raised a Hindu and I'm now a practicing atheist. And I was, it was always academics first, academics first, academics first. Everything else came secondary. But apart from, occasionally singing in school, I didn't really think I had much of many other talents. But there were people who used to say that, you could be a good public speaker or whatever, but it never really fit the cut of my jib, or I did not know what my jib was until I reached my 12th grade, and I told my mom and my pops, I said, all right, I'm outie. I'm getting out of here. So they said, where will you go? What will you do? And I went to my undergraduate university town, which is a place called Manipal. It's in southern Karnataka in India. And that was the place that changed my life. It was the monsoon of 2012. It was June 2012, and I had just started my first month of biotech engineering. I'd always known a fascination for molecular biology, for cell biology, for biomedical research, and I had a big fascination for the sciences. And I therefore decided to join their biotech engineering program. A month into this, my communications professor comes to me and she says, Karan, I think you should apply for one of these theater groups in town. And I said,
she just randomly said that?
I was doing a presentation of some sort, and she thought that I would fit that kind of thing. And I said, all right, well, why not give it a try? And I did. And it was crazy because about 450 people auditioned for that theater group. The group was called Dramanon, and they selected me to be one of their cast members for a series of short plays that they would do across their three branches: the branch in Manipal, the branch in Bangalore, and the branch in Hyderabad, which would convene together in Manipal every year for this. And I joined these guys, and within the next 4 years of my collegiate life, I did about 14 different productions with 3 theater groups across 3 cities. And there were spurts of time where I even went, touring with these people to
Yeah.
different cities of India, and we were performing there. And I used to use all my free time away from my academics to do that, and it became a very intrinsic part of my life. I built a community around myself. I found people with like-minded interests. I found people whom I could love and care about, and who accepted me and all my eccentricities combined. And I thought that was incredibly poetic. And it was the full ride, because in India, we don't experience high school like you folks experience high school. You have all those teenage awakening moments that you have in high school. We have those in college. And we have those in college because we leave the nest. And when we leave the nest, which is a deeply, deeply pigeonholed nest, we're surprised and we don't know what to do with all that freedom. And well, that is often accompanied by us thinking with our genitalia rather than just thinking with our heads.
Yeah.
So inevitably, I found love, and I found happiness, and it was great. And I got into a very how must I call it? A whirlwind of a relationship with an incredible partner, and I was doing theater, and I was doing public speaking, and I basically dipped my toes in every single pond that I could find in Manipal. It gave me a sense of unbridled freedom, and I found that to be incredibly liberating. In the spring of 2016, I was selected to join Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, as a PhD student in molecular cellular developmental biology. And I was pretty excited. And unfortunately, I knew that this would not bode well for my relationship with my then partner, but we decided to give it a go nonetheless. And I came to the United States. Now, this was not my first time in the United States. I had traveled a lot as a child. I'd been to Singapore. I'd been to New Zealand. I had been to different parts of India, obviously. And my father had been in business development of air conditioners and IT services. So he had gone all over the world several times. And he had lived in the United States. And I had lived in the United States in my 7th grade for 1 year. It was a very eventful year, but it was only 1 year that I lived in Cupertino in California. So this was not my first time being introduced to American culture, although it was my first time as an adult. And
with your genitalia.
Pardon?
And with your genitalia.
And with the fully evolved genitalia, of course. I was like, well, hello, America. And the general was like, hello, America. Yes, but yes, and it was great. I immediately made friends in the Midwest. Now, don't get me wrong. Before coming there, I was like, Iowa. Yeah. What am I going to find in Iowa?
Yeah,
this is bum shit in the middle of nowhere. What am I going to do here? All I know about Iowa is corn and pigs and corn and white people. So I was like, what am I going to do here? Exactly. And this kind of Oreo contrast may not work. I was pleasantly surprised. I found a community that was welcoming, that was loving, that was caring. And the trick was to not involve myself with the undergraduate people, with the, we will only think with our genitalia group. I chose not to get involved with the undergraduate crowd a lot, and being a graduate student, that comes naturally to us. So I instead decided to get involved with the local crowd. And I remember how it began. I was walking down the street 2 days after I had moved into my apartment, and I was going home from a Walmart. All right, I'm going home from a Walmart. I'm walking home, and I'm like, oh, look at me in America, walking home from Walmart with bags ass full. And I was walking on a main road called Grand Avenue, and I see this wonderful woman sitting on the veranda of her house, picking at plants with a lot of bugs around her. I was like, well, hey, I feel like I may be a little lost. Why don't I have a conversation with her? And I go up to her and I'm like, hello. And for the first time in my life,
did you say hi like that, really?
I usually do, yes. And for the first time in my life, somebody musically responded to my musical hello. And she said, "Oh, hello." And I said, "Oh, this is great. This is already starting out to be incredibly perfect. What is this, a Disney tale?" All right, fine. So we start talking. We have a wonderful conversation. Then she introduces me to her feisty neighbor. And her neighbor takes me inside their house. "Oh, look at me, strange guy in a strange land going into an absolute stranger's house." And next thing you know, we're just chugging down a bunch of Millers, which I, for the record, never drank ever afterwards. I will never ever drink that piss poor stain of alcohol ever again. But her gardener comes by, and her gardener immediately takes a liking to me, and he turns out to be a drummer. So then he takes me to his house, but filled with his bunch of friends who are all musicians, and then we start jamming. And just like that, a former theater guy became introduced to performing with jam bands, and that was what I did my entire free time in Iowa. I was just one thing led to another, one thing led to another, one consequence led to another, and they introduced me to the a little community called the Main Street Music Community in Ames, which is a bunch of artists and musicians and just regular people living in Iowa who are local to Central Iowa and not transient population people, as the people of the university. Yeah. And I immediately integrated myself into one of them, and they were more than welcoming about everything. And
how did you start? How did you start getting into? When did the jazz and the blues and the soul started kicking in for you? And when you started, what did it do for you when you started playing the music? Take us down that, because you painted this beautiful picture in a small amount of time, coming from India, being in this box, and then finding your freedom, finding this circle of people that had support, love, and you're trying a lot of different things, accepting you for who you are. Now, take us because when I see you play, there's a true appreciation for the music that you're playing, and also a big part of it, you're connecting to it. It brings you joy. It brings you happiness. So how did the souls and the jazz and the blues and playing music, when did that click for you and you connected to it? And what did that bring to you?
When I was a child, I used to pick up my father's old CDs, used to have Phil Collins and Pink Floyd and Kenny G. Why Kenny G, man? That guy plays elevator music. But anyway, I used to pick up those CDs every once in a while, and I used to sneak them into our music system, which was a very old music system, and I used to play those at nights. And one of these albums really, really caught my fancy as a teenager. It was Pink Floyd's The Wall. And then I listened to that album, and it awoke something inside me. I started becoming more socially aware, more politically aware, and I started reading a lot. I used to read a lot when I was a child, but this time I started reading about musicians, and I read about David Gilmour, the guitarist of Pink Floyd, who replaced Syd Barrett, the original founding member of Pink Floyd. And I read that he was a blues guitarist, and I said, "What is this genre of music?" I was only 15 or 16. I did not know that this was going to change my life, and it did, because I started going on this internet binge trip. The good old days of broadband and dial-up. Anyway, yes, I remember dial-up. I'm like an 80s kid in the 90s. Anyway.
I remember dial-up. It was horrible. I remember LimeWire, all that shit.
Get off the phone!
Yep.
Oh my God, I remember LimeWire. That was crazy. That was crazy. A moment of silence for my computers who have all suffered incriminating viruses.
Yep, same here.
But it was incredible, and I started reading up about the blues, and then I read about about how slavery had impacted Black people, and how they had a transformative way of communicating with each other through hymnals and gospel music and slave hollers, and how they transcended a piece of art that came from their very intrinsic part of what made them who they are. Because I would often say to myself, in those days, in the 1800s and the 1700s. Uh, the white man had taken away everything from the black man. He had taken away his freedom. He had taken away his way and means to live. He had taken away his independence, but he couldn't take away his soul. And with that soul, the black man chose to incorporate that into a most pure form of artistic expression that I found a deep, deep appreciation for. But beyond that, I found a sense of warm resonance when I started listening to the blues. The very first artist I ever listened to was a man who died penniless, cold, and alone, and his music left the solar system in 2001. His name was Blind Lemon Jefferson. And he's famous for his song "Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground," which is included in Voyager 1's Golden Records. So he was one of the first blues musicians I ever listened to. And when I was listening to him sing the earliest versions of gospel blues, it resonated within me so much. I remember bursting into tears that very evening. And then I went on this whole journey of self-discovery with music. I dove deep into the various eras of the blues, Delta blues, gospel blues, Piedmont blues, Chicago blues, Memphis blues, Tennessee blues, the shifting era, the electric era, the 40s, the transformative era of blues, the earliest blues singers and how they changed the cultural landscape, the saga of Ma Rainey and her greatest protege, Bessie Smith. I started reading immense amounts of books and online articles about all of these great musicians, and I started getting into documentaries and into movies about them. This was not just about the music for me anymore. This was about a culture that had refused to let the fire in itself die, that allowed itself the opportunity to persist despite all sorts of intrusions upon its very core being by external forces, that it simply wouldn't take no for an answer and it would still continue to express itself. And lo and behold, when I came to the United States, some of the closest friends I made were from this community. In fact, my adoptive sister is a woman named Depeche, and she's black, and her family was the first family I spent Christmas with. I used to have my own little Christmas tree growing up, but it wasn't that great. And this was my first ever real Christmas that I'd ever had, and I was sitting around with her entire family on a cold December 2016 in St. Louis, Missouri, one of the heartlands of the blues, a city so rich in its history and yet so tumultuous in the things that has happened to it and its people. And I was sitting there enjoying a beautiful evening with mist in the skies, whereas in Iowa at that very time it was snowing very heavily. And I remember thinking to myself, with Depeche lounging on the couch next to me, this was what I first realized, that I have some meaning of family. And I realized that music and culture and black people had a lot to do with that. I never really identified with my own people as much because we are a traditionally conservative folk. We typically like to involve ourselves with each other. We do have a principle called Atiti Devo Bhava, which means guest is God. But in my personal experience, Indians don't take too kindly to other Indians who are a little off the beaten track. Yeah. The kind of familial belonging that I found in the United States amongst folks of color, and even amongst several people in the white populations, was one of acceptance, where they were like, okay, we see how weird you are, and you do that. So yeah. And yes, every other offshoot, blues, jazz, soul, rock and roll, all of it obviously is indirectly or directly inspired by the blues, whether it's chord progressions, whether it's the content of the music. And that was my discovery as well, which is how I got into all these forms of music.
Okay. How difficult was it for you to, it seems like you jumped around a lot for many different reasons, and you found love in communities. How difficult was it for you to leave that behind and, now and take those things with you to move on to something else, going back to India, how difficult were those transitions for you, jumping from different places, knowing that you built something there just for that moment, like, oh, I got love, I got acceptance, and I got family.
Well, if I figure it out, I'll let you know. It was yes, it was a huge upheaval. Each and every time I've had to move, it's been an incredible upheaval, except for the first time when I left home, or rather the place where I was born and raised. It didn't really feel like much. It felt like an adventure, a new life, new road, a new season premiere or something like that.
Mhm.
But when I left Manipal, I was worried. I was worried that I would probably be in a place where I wouldn't belong. And this was the first place that I learned to call home, with its beautiful beachy landscapes and its tropical rainforests nearby. And I was worried whether I would be able to find a community again. And unfortunately, over a period of time in the United States, the long distance with my relationship with my partner also fell apart. Um, and I was worried how I was going to be able to build a community. But surprisingly, Iowa did that for me, and it was surprisingly easy for me to do that. Of course, there were a lot of people who were quite, I wouldn't say they were willfully ignorant, but they weren't aware of an upbringing as an Indian, because most Indian international students in the United States, which I have observed, they tend to keep to themselves. They tend to
Yeah.
keep to their own community. I was not like that. I was like, I want to experience rainbows and peacocks and every single kind of animal, creature, and human being out there in a totally non-bestial way. Thank you very much. Let me make that clear. Anyway, I had gone to Iowa as a PhD student. Unfortunately, after I finished my lab rotations and I joined my research lab, my graduate major professor thought that I was not ready for a PhD, and he felt that I would be better suited to a master's program. So he switched me to a master's, and unfortunately, I didn't have enough funding, so I had to take up a teaching assistantship. And as international students in the United States, you are not allowed to work anywhere outside of the university. That's illegal. The only way you can work outside of the university is after your graduate program, when you get on to something called an OPT, an optional practical training, which is an extension of your student visa, which allows you to work in the field of which you have done your educational degree in the United States. When the time came, when I finished and finally defended my thesis in August of 2018, I had aggressively been applying for employment everywhere, but it was a dark, dark time. And you must remember, the Republican administration had taken full force in the executive power. The executive power was having unprecedented monopoly over legislature, combined with the increasing influence of state and the National Senate in terms of educational budgets. Somewhere between a huge sum of millions and millions of dollars of funding had been cut off to the NIH, and employment opportunities for biomedical researchers were becoming incredibly scarce. More so for immigrants and for international students, who, by the way, pay our fair share of taxes. We do. And unfortunately, who would hire you? Who would hire you if you had to work for them for 2 years, and they would invest all of this money in you, and all of this potential in you, and all of this education in you, only to have you at a 50-50 gamble at the end of it on whether or not you would get a work extension visa
Yeah.
from the US government, which functions on a total lottery system. All right, it functions on a total lottery system. So no matter how perfect you are, there's still a 50-50 chance that you won't get it. And therefore, companies weren't willing to take that risk, and universities weren't willing to take that risk. Although I was in line for several major research institutes, and unfortunately, I did not get, at least in terms of what I feel, I did not get the support that I needed from my graduate major professor, especially in terms of applying for these positions, because he was, let's just euphemistically put it, otherwise indisposed. So I realized soon enough that I was reaching a fight or flight mode in the August of 2018 when I graduated. I had to move out of my apartment. I had to move in with my friends, Ross and Rachel. No relation to the TV show Friends. They could not be more different. They're incredibly redneck, and they now have a new child. So yay, three's company. Anyway, Yes, I moved in with my friends Ross and Rachel, and I lived in their basement like a shady Indian guy living in the basement. Whilst I tried to apply for jobs as part of the 3 month extension on my education visa, and I didn't get any. I didn't get any jobs. I continued to apply all over the country, but I kept getting rejection after rejection. In the 1.5 year that followed from August 2018, I had applied for more than 1,700 research
Damn.
positions,
You were
all
sick.
ending in rejections. And
Damn.
my hairline was here. so so
Wow.
suffice it to say, it was a long journey. But those last few months were incredibly difficult, from August 2018 to November 2018, and I started to reconcile myself very slowly with the fact that I was going to have to leave. I was going to have to leave the people who had become an intrinsic part of my life, who had become the very definition of what I knew to be family, a community, a place where no matter how difficult my days and afternoons were, my evenings and my weekends would always be filled with joy, mutual camaraderie, and just, uh, a bunch of people who were going through the same struggles, just getting through it together in a bar or through a gig or a show or just some weird escapade in the middle of nowhere, because that's Iowa. Um, and I knew that I was going to have to leave all of this behind. And it burned a hole in my heart. It really did. But I'll tell you one thing: they did not know when I was going to leave. First, they thought I was going to leave in October. Then they thought I was going to leave in early November. And then they thought I was going to leave at the end of November. The last one was true. Each time that this whole community thought that I was going to leave, they held several going away parties for me. I had 3 going away parties.
That's
My
great.
last 5 days in the United States, I didn't sleep in my own bed. Not once. Not once. It was beautiful. They came out in herds and herds, and dozens of people flocked to our staple joints where we would all just come and spend time together. And I was known for making these grandiose toasts to them.
Mm.
Every single time they would be unique toasts, and they would always end with the same line: "To the promise of tomorrow." Um, and they would always say, "Karen, to the promise of tomorrow, man. Hey, man, we're gonna miss you, buddy. You gotta come back, man. You're gonna have a home here." It was beautiful. Hundreds of people came out in the streets that last night before I left Ames, Iowa, and I spent the entire night with my best friend John Marco, who's a musician who has ever since then moved to Chicago. And in the wee hours of the morning, my friend Jim dropped me to the Des Moines airport. And I took that little flight out of there to O'Hare, and then to Qatar, and then to India. And I realized that this was the beginning of the rest of my life. It's been a year and a half since then. It's been almost 2 years since then. And you wouldn't believe, every single day this community keeps in touch with me.
No, I think I think
That's
that's
so
beautiful
beautiful.
because
And you leave a great, you have left a deep impact in their lives. So obviously it's something that's coming from you, because you bring some light in their lives for them to, really connect with you that way.
but I also feel too that that you physically left there, but that's the only thing that left
Yeah,
was
your
just your
spirit's still
body.
there.
But but they're still around and they're still community. I know it doesn't feel the same at times, but you still, at least where you in India, where you started, where you felt like you was an outsider and you didn't have anyone that understands you. Now you have a good phone phone book of people that you can call, Facebook, that they're there, where you
FaceTime.
didn't have none of that in the beginning. You went on this trip and this journey, and you earned these reconnection with spirits because you found this place with them and you just automatically connected, and they're still there and always be there for you, which is a beautiful thing. Because yeah, it can be lonely at times where you're at now, but you're just a text away, they're just a phone call away or a Zoom call away, and they're there. Rather than back in the days, you didn't have none of
That's
that.
right.
You only had the music, the soul. Now you have multiple outlets to
Still connect,
connect with,
even though
which I
you're
think is
far.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I think on some level, I've been incredibly fortunate throughout my strife because I don't know if I've mentioned this. Growing up in school, you remember when I mentioned that in my seventh grade I lived in the United States. I lived
Hmm.
in Cupertino. I
Yeah.
had a bunch of friends over there. When I came back, obviously having lived in a very different westernized culture, when I came back to India and I had to spend my remaining schooling years in the same school that I had left, I was a I was bullied very heavily. I used to get beaten up every single day in school, almost every single day. I had moments when my teachers used to bitch about me in other classes. They used to say things like, that Obama's rejected son, he came here and did all this nonsense. He thinks he is so smart, showing off in front of us. And they used to just, bitch about me all the time. They used to beat me up. And I never felt a sense of belonging. And in those dark moments, only the music kept me going. Um, and I often feel like that ever since I've returned. But even though I've been able to keep in touch with them, since I came back to India, when I did in 2018, I lived in Delhi. I lived in my father's ancestral home in Delhi because I do not get along very well with my mother. There's a whole psychological and emotional and physical history behind there.
Mhm.
But that's why I decided to live in Delhi until I got employment, and I only got employment in September of 2019. In fact, my new job in Hyderabad in South India employed me on 9/11.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. So, so until then, and even after then, I have had extreme periods of social isolation. When the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, or as you guys know it as the COVID-19 pandemic, hit, it didn't really change my life much because I had been in social isolation ever since I'd returned, with the exception of a few moments where I'd made a few friends after coming back. And I hope that I can return to a place where I can again belong. But I think what I have learned through all my trials and tribulations and clinical depression, anxiety, and alcoholism that accompanied all of these things is you have to take things one day at a time. And if you cannot appreciate the things that you have, you will be in constant yearnings of the things which you don't.
Okay.
Which is not to say that those things are mutually exclusive, but maybe it's time for some balance. And
Mhm.
that is something that I'm yearning towards.
Okay.
Nice.
And I'm hoping that someday, this is my dream for the future. And I've known this for a long time, since the first night that I walked into a British pub in Ames, Iowa. There's this astrophysics professor, a former astrophysics professor. His name's Marcus. He owns a pub in Ames, Iowa called the Mucky Duck Pub. In 2016 was my first actual winter.
Mm.
It was my first actual. I'd never been in a winter before, and then all of a sudden, minus 26 degrees Celsius. Oh my God, my nads are freezing off. Anyway, I do not have that much of an obsession with genitalia. I think it just suits the purpose of this conversation. For those listening out there, anyway, it was a cold night, and my friend Dave Carr had just picked me up from the Des Moines hospital because I had been admitted with a severe blood clot in my dorsalis pedis artery, which is in my toes,
Oh,
Mm.
in my right foot. And I had been admitted into the hospital for about 14 days.
Damn.
And they had put me up on morphine and a whole bunch of opioids and corticosteroids, and they couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. They thought it was gout, then they thought it was a neuropathy, then they thought it was a muscular issue. I was like, hey guys, it's a vascular issue. Do a complete blood count test, and then do a Doppler test. You'll find you'll find an embolism, and then do your diagnosis from there, and then put me on blood thinners. And they were like, "Are you a physiologist?" I said, "No, but I'm a molecular biology researcher, and you guys are not doing your jobs well." So $40,000 of healthcare expenses later, before insurance, mind you. They finally figured out what was wrong, and they put me on Xarelto or rivaroxaban, which is a very severe blood thinner. And then they were like, "Well, we're not going to be able to discharge you unless you get off the morphine." And I was like, "But this shit is kind of nice, by that time," because I was like, "Hey man, this shit is amazing. They keep dosing you with like 5 milligrams of morphine every single day. sorry, every single hour. And I'm like, oh, all my troubles in the world have gone away. This is like no other drug that I've ever had. Oh, look, it's my graduate major professor who's come to visit me. You look funky. You're bald, man. I didn't know you were bald. Holy shit, I'm going crazy. I should get off this shit. So I started getting off the morphine myself after the 11th day, and by the 14th day, I was discharged. And my friend Dave picks me up, and he's like, "Hey, Karan, I'm not going to take you home, all right? I'm going to take you to this bar. It's a great bar in Ames. It's called the Mucky Duck. Have you ever been there?" I was like, "No, Dave, I have not been there." And he's like, "Well, you're going to love this place. This place is amazing." So we go there. We go to the Mucky Duck, and it's a lonely Thursday night. All right, it's about minus 12 or minus 13 degrees Celsius outside. A breeze is out in the sky. You do not want to be outside. You want to be indoors and snuggly. And that is exactly what the 5 or 6 people were doing inside the Mucky Duck at that time. I walk in, I introduce myself to the owner of the bar and the bartenders, and one thing leads to another, and within a half hour or 1 hour, this was the scene, as Marcus described it to me 2 years later before I was about to leave. He said, "Karan, you came in that one night, and it was so lonely, and it was so quiet, and then all of a sudden you bring all these people through. They just kind of show up, and the next thing you know, you're all just sitting there singing Queen songs at the top of your lungs. It was something I'd never seen. I've never seen that many people get on together and sing fucking Somebody to Love and Bohemian Rhapsody with so much fervor, and there you were at the center of it all. I make so much money for a Thursday night, but the atmosphere was taken away completely." Karan, I'm saying, you might be good at your sciences, but this is where your calling is. You should get yourself your own bar, make it a music and performance arts bar. You get all these people together and build a community around it. It would be amazing. You'd be great at it. You're a natural. In the months that so followed, I started doing odd jobs for him. I started cleaning the bar. I started cleaning the toilets. I started cleaning out his food truck. I started doing all sorts of odd jobs, organizing gigs, getting people from the community to the Mucky Duck, and I loved it. I loved every single second of it. It was honest. It was honest work. I loved it, and that's what I want to do. I want to live in a small traveler's town somewhere in the West, maybe the European Union or the United States, and I want to have my own music and performance arts bar, a place where artists and connoisseurs of art have a safe haven to themselves. And just generally people who feel like they're misfits can come to my establishment and always have somebody who will love them unconditionally and who will care for them and who will listen to their problems and who will make their lives at least a little bit easier for the amount of time they choose to spend in my establishment. A place which flows with music and art and an amalgamation of several cultures, and which pays the artists a fair deal of money to be able to perform there. And that is what I want to do, build a community around my own establishment in a little Western town. And I think it's going to take a couple of years, and I don't care how long it takes. I'm going to get it done.
Nice.
Yes, you will. What a way
So we got to know you
Yeah.
for a good amount of time. You took us on this
Wow.
tremendous journey,
Mhm.
and we're almost done with this interview. We got this last segment called "Let's Look Inside," and the first question is, what do you love about yourself?
A willingness to care and a willingness to put people before myself, though it may be to a fault and detriment of my own. I will never stop caring for people, and I will never stop trying to do whatever I can to make them happy, because I don't derive any happiness myself. I derive my happiness from making other people happy.
And the next question is, if the average lifespan was 40 years, how would you live your life differently?
I would love to live my life differently in a way that I would exclusively choose to follow my performance dreams and passions. Unfortunately, we live in a dystopian economic society where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the overwhelming encroachment of capitalism on the middle class does not allow us to do that. However, within the circumstances of this context, I would definitely do a lot of riskier things. I would quit my job. I would quit. I would quit the pharmaceutical industry and say, "Screw it! I'm going to give this shit my best shot."